This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Folks, welcome into another edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you for a discussion on cannabis legalization in Rhode Island with Maggie Kain of Yes We Cannabis RI. And look, this is a conversation that's been going on for way too long. I think most of us would agree that it is absolutely time for cannabis to be legalized here in the Ocean State for a number of reasons. Number one, equity reasons. Number two, for revenue generation reasons. And I think the latter is probably helping the cause in a significant manner inside the halls of the General Assembly and also in the governor's office. As we come out of COVID-19 and we start to think about recovery, and I just saw Joe Shekarchi this week, the Speaker of the House, and he said, look, we're, as far as I'm concerned, we're not really focusing on a pandemic right now. We're focusing on a recovery right now. Well, a part of that is going to be having to innovate and explore new revenue generation, not only for the state, but for individuals as well. So the conversation around cannabis legalization, it's not just a yes or no, should we do it? Okay, great. There's a lot of procedural elements. Who is going to be able to obtain a license to operate a shop, to be able to cultivate cannabis? What are the taxation elements going to look like? There's a lot of concern about inside baseball favoring certain individuals or certain corporations when it comes to opportunity in an economic sense. What about folks who have been arrested, have been imprisoned as a result of cannabis? Is it ex post facto that you say, look, we're moving on, we can't change the past? Or is it, as I believe is the appropriate decision, the moment where records are expunged so that somebody who was arrested for possession of cannabis in 1996 isn't inhibited from getting a job today? There's so many questions around this, and it's time to dig in and make this happen and move on. Because, look, it also, the more it's delayed and the more that our neighboring states are cashing in on this and the more that there's sort of this miscellaneous confusion with law enforcement, where it's like police don't necessarily know what to do. I know I've talked to some police officers who have said, look, this is not a good area to be enforcing anymore. We're not talking about driving a car while stoned. We're talking about possession or, somebody who's on the beach and they get caught smoking and, how do you handle that? So all this gray area needs to go away. And I think that that's what we try to get to the bottom of today, or at least I try to get to the bottom of with Maggie Kain of Yes We Cannabis. How do we remove the gray area and make legalization benefit the most amount of people possible, right? So that's the discussion for today. I'm very curious about your feedback on this, though, because there are people out there who are opposed to legalization, and I'd like to hear why. If you are, bill@ripodcast.com. Always tweet at me if you'd like, at Bill Bartholomew. I'll get back to you. Or if you're in favor of this, what sort of mechanics you'd like to see. It's almost certainly going to happen this year. It's going to be in the budget. There's going to be an element of this one way or another. It's more a question of how do we do it at this point, right? It's more a question of what's fair in all the different nuanced areas when it comes to, again, to the licenses, to the expungement of records, how law enforcement should be expected to proceed, and so on and so forth. I mean, come on, folks, let's get real. It's time to legalize cannabis here in Rhode Island. I think many of us, myself included, have been saying this for a long time, and it's not just a Rhode Island thing. I mean, there are plenty of states where this is not the case, but we're seeing New York come on board. New Jersey just did it. And obviously Massachusetts for quite some time have been raking in cash and finding ways to move forward in the criminal justice system in an era where prohibition is over. So an interesting dialogue today with Miss Kain here on the podcast. By the way, B-Town is Rhode Island's #1 podcast. We beat out all the corporate media, all the public broadcasting podcasts, all that stuff, with none of the nonsense of advertising or spamming your inbox. The only reason why, because that's right, you out there, you've been talking about the show. You've been spreading the word on social media. You've been telling friends, I guess, social distance-wise or in person, whatever is most appropriate in this given moment. And for that, I'm incredibly thankful. So continuing our grassroots movement here, we're on episode 292. As we approach episode 300, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might just put out another episode and be like, here it is, episode 300. Or I might do a look back on the journey to 300. I don't know. We'll see how much time there is. There isn't enough time. That's the one thing that has inhibited me is a lack of time. I get a zillion press releases, a lot of requests to come on the show. I can only fulfill so many of those. And if I get a message from you, You can persist. Again, bill@ripodcast.com. If you're requesting to come on the show, just follow up with me, and maybe we'll be able to find some time down the line. But we're trying to keep things as relevant in terms of news making, big picture issues happening here in the Ocean State and beyond. Some exciting stuff coming up as well down the line. I can see the schedule right now, and I'm really looking forward to what's on the horizon. And just a couple of weeks ago, actually it was just last week, what am I talking about? We had Governor McKee on for 30 minutes one-on-one. That episode, wherever you're listening right now, that's there for you. I've been getting some great feedback on that from you out there. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen and write in. And again, Governor McKee stopping here in Bartholomew Town, his first radio, quote-unquote, interview as governor. Okay, let's get to today's conversation with Maggie Kain. Yes, we Cannabis RI, legalizing weed here in the Ocean State. All right, so we are here with Maggie Kain on a chilly morning today here in Rhode Island, unfortunately, after heating up quite considerably over the last week. But we're talking something that is finally coming to fruition here in Rhode Island. It's been a long time coming, and really, frankly, globally should be happening. But that is the legalization of cannabis on a recreational level. And with this comes, obviously, the act itself of legalizing cannabis products beyond just that which was legalized in the federal farm bill in terms of CBD, but also the mechanics of such legalization in terms of retail, who gets to sell it, how much those licenses cost, where it can be consumed. There's a lot of equity questions also in terms of people who have been incarcerated or have something on their record related to this. And it's an issue that appeals to a lot of different people across the political spectrum. I'm sure a libertarian and progressive would totally agree on this matter. And I think a lot of people who are business savvy would also agree. Where they differentiate is the mechanics of how it should be legalized. So welcome to the podcast, and glad to do this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to discuss and get a little deeper dive into this. So
definitely.
It's great.
Yeah. So where are we at right now? We're taping right in the middle of March. This will be released towards the end of March. So where are we at right now here in March 2021 as far as this process unfolding?
So last December, the Senate President Ruggiero, he announced that the Senate would be taking up legalization during this session. So there is a bill, a Senate bill. The lead sponsors are Senator Miller and Senator McCaffrey. Senator Miller is a familiar name when it comes to legalization. He really has been the mainstay in the Senate every year to put in a bill for legalization. The newest development is Senator McCaffrey joining that fight. So that sort of indicates how serious the Senate really is about passing this bill. And they have quite a few sponsors on it too. And then as well, we have Senator McKee, who just came out with his budget, and he has Article 11, which has his own plan for legalization. Yeah.
So the big hurdle now will, of course, be inside the House, where, look, Rhode Island has a nature of a history, if you will, that is somewhat puritanical. I mean, we see things like this growing up around here. I think that's everywhere to a certain extent. Obviously, there's elements of that. The question will be, does this get pushed into the conversation largely on a budgetary angle, or is it also on an equity angle? What's your sense right now as far as the motivation for getting recreational marijuana, or cannabis, put forth to a tangible thing here in 2021?
Well, I think, it's just sort of rational thinking, right? We're surrounded by states, and I was corrected. Connecticut has yet to pass the recreational bill. It was supposed to pass last year. But we're surrounded by states that do have recreational cannabis. So it's just as easy to go up to Massachusetts and purchase. So that's about, they charge, roughly 20% tax on all of that collectively. So that is quite a large amount of revenue that Rhode Island's missing out on. And so, especially when it came to the pandemic, it became obvious that everyone really did want to spend some money. It's widely quoted that, liquor stores, their revenue went up, as well as cannabis sales. So, the state is missing out on a lot of revenue. Then there is this sort of thought of, okay, well, the national conversation is, really been focused on criminal justice and social equity. So no elected official can really have this conversation without approaching that subject.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not they're coming from a direct enough angle, that's not for me to decide. We, I work with a coalition. It's Yes We Cannabis Rhode Island. It's a great coalition of a lot of different voices from this movement. And we've just sort of decided that there are some non-negotiables when it does come to criminal justice and social equity. So hopefully whoever's going to pass this legislation, whether it be through the budget or through a Senate bill, we're hoping that they listen to some real true facts about, the war on drugs and the damage it's caused to many communities in Rhode Island.
Well, let's hear those non-negotiable. Let's get those laid out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we could take a really deep dive in all of the types of social equity that could be put into a cannabis bill. And it sort of depends on what angle you're coming from, whether it become civil liberties, patient rights, criminal justice, right? So what we've decided is most important that cannabis itself has to be taken off the controlled substance list, the Rhode Island controlled substance list, because without that, in both bills, unfortunately, they have found other ways to criminalize cannabis use. So what has been proven is that even in Rhode Island, where it is decriminalized, they still give out tickets for possession under an ounce. And I think it was probably the ACLU had come up with a study that the majority of those tickets are issued to people of color. They're about $150 fine. No one wants to pay that for something that pretty much you can get legally, say potentially 5 minutes away, right? If someone lives up near Massachusetts. So we really do need to get that off the controlled substance list to have a true criminal justice reform attached to this bill, right? We also need all records of any type of marijuana convictions expunged, and we have to figure out a way to not make that a burden on the person with that record, right? We should just make it sort of this universal check that somebody can do, make it easy, doesn't make it a cost, doesn't make it the responsibility on them to file those papers, and also make sure that they communicate that to all the different types of, let's say, and I'm not the person to talk about this, but they really do have to have a clear communication from all types of background checks and things like that. We also need to make sure that anyone with a prior marijuana conviction can have access to work in this industry, right? Currently, in the medical marijuana program, if you do have a conviction, then you can't get a job at a dispensary. You can't get a job at a cultivators. You really are shut out of this now legal $1 billion business that really they were carrying the water for many millions of people that did purchase cannabis from them, right? Who are now maybe spending their money, in legal stores. So it really is this hypocrisy, right? And there is a law in Rhode Island that says with that equal licensing, you can't they do try to make it easier to get a license for people with prior convictions. But if you have a conviction in that subject, you're unable to get that license, right? So, and then also, with the social equity, just making sure that the money that we do make from the tax revenue is put into a locked account, not just put into the, general fund where it can be sort of spent in background ways. We really do need to invest in direct investment into communities, whether that be, loans, no interest loans for people that want to start businesses, grants, investing in communities, nonprofits, so they know exactly how to spend that money. That's really important, right? Because that is going to be a lot of money, and not just right now, I think in the Senate bill or either one, they talk about the licensing money, right, to go into the social equity. Well, no, we need the revenue piece of it too, right? And then, so we just really need to keep the industry open. We need to have true criminal justice involved, and to move forward on this for sure.
Yeah, no question. There's another element as well, and you sort of tapped into it with patient rights. And look, if you go into one of the dispensaries here in Rhode Island right now, you're going to see people who are elderly. You're going to see people who have severe debilitations, wheelchair bound. You can't necessarily make a judgment, obviously, on someone, but oftentimes you see someone and your gut tells you this person is suffering from cancer or AIDS or any number of other qualifying conditions. And that individual in that medical store is then in a line with someone who potentially has a Corona Light straw cowboy hat on, who's yelling, "Oh, hey, like they got the OG Kush back." So you subject people who are obtaining legitimate medicine to an environment that is more in line with what you might see on St. Patrick's Day in downtown Newport or in a fraternity environment. And that person is then forced to either be uncomfortable or number two, they're just going to have to wait longer. So that element as well, it's separating those who have qualifying conditions who use cannabis for medicine from people who just like the blaze. Huge difference.
Huge difference. And unfortunately, I feel that the medical patients have really spent the past, up to 10 years really defending their rights as patients for this medicinal plant, right?
Yeah.
Almost every year they have to go up and testify. The state is always trying to nickel and dime them, raising rates, also trying to cut out home grow. And when you listen to these patients' stories, it really is heartbreaking because, I think that we have the same viewpoint that this is just a plant. If this makes someone feel better, then God bless, leave them alone, right? Why make it even harder for them to feel better, especially if they do have some, physical ailments. And that burns me, that is a piece of it too, is that when you talk about moving to the recreational, yes, we do have to respect the patients and, talk creatively about how their rights can be protected, but also don't smother the industry like they did with the medical program, right? You go to and this is, especially with COVID, right? This adds a whole nother thing about people with compromised immune systems. But also you would go to these dispensaries on a Friday, a holiday, there'd be lines wrapped outside, around the building. And you would see patients that obviously should not be standing outside in 35-degree weather, right? So they really did smother the industry. They caused a lot of cultivators to either go out of business or leave the state after they had invested a lot of money in the equipment that you would need to grow. So we really don't want that to happen with the recreational as well.
Yeah, and there's also stuff on the federal level. I saw Senator Sam Bell tweet something that the McKee proposal for legalized marijuana would not allow someone who lives in affordable housing to consume that there. That's incorrect on Senator Bell's part. That's a housing and urban development federal problem that needs to be addressed there. So it's also important to stay on track with what's state and what's federal. Of course, that's the next frontier, going to the federal level and trying to knock this up. I mean, this is a nonsense subject. I mean, let's be honest about it. It's at a point where it's so immature to take the position that cannabis is more dangerous than coffee. And look, driving while smoking or having consumed weed and going for a joyride or just driving to work, there is an inherent danger to that. I'm sure thousands of people did it this morning, but those are areas that are separate and have to be managed separately from the reality that people by and large want this product. And by and large, it's not anywhere near as unhealthy as it's been made out to be through years and years of propaganda.
Absolutely. And you touched on two things, right? One that I had forgotten to mention is that the civil liberties piece of this is really important going forward. There are some pieces, especially in McKee's bill, where there are things that do not protect the cannabis user, right? A right to be fired, the employee can fire you. And with the affordable housing, it's the family housing that you have to have a written permission from the landlord or owner to even to consume cannabis, but specifically to smoke or to vape, which is ironic, right? Like I've lived in multitude of those types of apartments. And I don't think I've ever thought of that. Right.
Yeah.
So, there is that piece, right? So there is some conditions that really hold. It's another way to criminalize cannabis use while legalizing it. So I've sort of started calling it like we're regulating and taxing it, but we're not necessarily legalizing it. And yes, that does have something to do with it, a Schedule I drug category on the federal level. And it would solve so many problems if they would just get that, it's next to heroin, probably cocaine. I don't even know if cocaine makes it to level 1 drug schedule, So that is an issue when it comes to federal funding to, any type of state properties or subsidies. But we really do need to also end the stigma of cannabis use.
Yeah.
Right. Like why? And I get it. You really do have to go against over 100 years of propaganda against this plant. But in every conversation, you have to say, oh, well, that's legalized cannabis. But, no, but no one can drive on cannabis, after they've consumed it. Well, yeah, people who use cannabis are very aware of that. You don't ask that same question necessarily of somebody who might have a prescription for a certain type of medication or, somebody who loves their wine. Every time someone talks about wine, do you say, oh, but you can't drive when you drink wine? Like, do you have to be, it's like, so these bills in a way, as much as I appreciate these senators and the governor really attempting to move this conversation forward, we do have to address the fact that these bills do not end that stigma and they do not move us into this more, you said, let's just be a little bit more profound with our thinking, right? Why do we have to have this narrow viewpoint of this plant, especially when the entire country has sort of moved forward to some degree? I mean, even middle America states are moving forward. I think I saw Wyoming, which obviously has a majority GOP, legislature. I want to say 99% that they are going to be legalizing cannabis. So, they may not be doing it the way we want it to, but really this has become, a non-issue to some degree.
Hey, do you want to reach tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders each month? And not just any Rhode Islanders who are plugged into politics, media, arts and culture, newsmakers, and all that is going on in the Ocean State? Well, we can help you do that through podcast, live stream, social media advertising, and much more. Send me an email, bill@ripodcast.com, or text me 401-524-6825. Yeah, and even on a global scale, there are nations in South America that have legalized it, and they're seeing extraordinary returns in terms of revenue, but also in terms of where people are, the pathway, so to speak, to addiction of severe substances is significantly reduced as well. So that sort of gateway mentality that's also been kind of proven to be artificial.
Right.
There's also the element of this that's really stunning of medical research, where by removing it from that schedule, you allow for extraordinary opportunities in medicine. I know someone personally who was severely affected by, and still is, but severely impacted by ALS. And by consuming CBD, that person was then able to have much more mobility, communication ability. And there was such a fight for that individual to just legally be able to consume something that you can now buy at a 7-Eleven.
Right.
And you have to think that 5 years from now, we'll be at that point with cannabis writ large. Why not jump the gun? Why not let people experiment? Why not try to find cures or at least therapeutics for severe and even sometimes mild conditions?
No, I agree with you. And this is a very important issue for me for many reasons. And, personally, I've gotten a lot of benefits from consuming cannabis, but I also come from a family that has had many benefits from consuming cannabis. I know many friends, who have medicinally benefited as well. So to see this it's just for patients to be able to figure out how they want to treat their illnesses and maybe not decide that, Western medicine pharmaceuticals is the way that they necessarily want to go, right? Especially when it comes, I don't want to talk too much because I am no expert, but what we know about the brain, what we know about addiction, what we know about how the body works has just changed so dramatically, let's say in the past 20 years, that to not support that type of research and really try to get us to think in a different way about our health can be profoundly impacting. But, again, we're still coming up with this, up against the stigma of this plant, which is all based on lies that were created because of racism and xenophobia, right? Like, I just watched this most amazing documentary, and it's always like, oh, you think you know everything about, or a lot about a subject, then you learn so much more. And just the specifics of how they created those laws are so specific. And a lot of it just has to do with, early 20th century xenophobia and racism. And that's just it. And unfortunately, that is part and parcel with the United States history. So you can't deny it.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Now, in Rhode Island right now, there's at least recently, and I'm pretty sure it's the same, there's no one who's sitting in the ACI because of a cannabis conviction, whether it's distribution or possession or anything like that. But it can be tagged onto other crimes. So if you're, DUI that has a severe outcome, you're carrying a firearm and while distributing weed or something like that. That's there. So it's also important to separate that from the vast majority of people who are just looking for this product for maybe an experimental reason. Maybe, you're in therapy and, you're exercising and you're eating well and you still aren't able to tap into, you're meditating or whatever it is, but there's a way that cannabis can help you enjoy life more. The conflation of that with someone who is an armed dealer of drugs of any kind is also a problem, and that's part of that propaganda effort. That's going to come down to education. Do you know of any education pieces that can sort of undo the propaganda that are going, at least here in Rhode Island?
Right. I would be remiss to not talk about the formerly incarcerated union.
Yep.
This is the first time I've worked with them, and I've learned so much from them. They were really the bedrock of Yes We Cannabis Rhode Island. They got all of us together to really start working on this. And they have been working, on expungement and other criminal justice issues for years. And they really have brought to light how damaging these marijuana convictions that remain on your record are for you your entire life. And if you think about just this whole system of, locking people up that we love to do in the United States, it really is the sick cycle that could be traced back to how you were born to some degree, right?
Yep.
So as a group, we are really trying, and it's amazing. I'm like, oh, do we really have to carry this water to really show people how damaging these prior convictions are? But yes, we do, right? Because I know that there are a lot of well-meaning people. I'm included in this list, right? I am not saying that I'm above this at all. We talk about making this a more just world, talking about criminal justice, talk about using our privilege to really make changes in our in our legal system. But I really do believe that this cannabis issue is sort of this pinpoint that really encapsulates so many problems that we have and so many injustices and so many inequities. So I really do, if anyone's listening to this, I do encourage you to go look at our social media. We are trying to share different articles because there is a very wide-ranging effort nationally and internationally to really clear these things up. And a lot of it is powered by people that have been impacted by this, whether they're part of the community, whether they've personally been impacted. So we really do need to follow their lead and figure out what are the things that we really need to convey to our allies about how they can maybe change their own thinking about it, right? Because they might, we're funny, humans are funny, right? And we always have to deal with them on some level when you come to advocacy. So I just hope that everyone, when they think about this issue, really keeps an open mind and really takes the time to really explore how damaging the war on drugs, and even when it comes to marijuana convictions, which is not what people think of when they think of the war on drugs. They think of, right? They think of all the things that the media shared in the 80s and 90s, which I would, I do have to say, you will see the militarization of the police force as a result of the national war on drugs, right? So there's just a lot there. And I would encourage anyone to reach out to us. Just look on Instagram, check out the hashtag, cannabis equity, really look at these groups all over that are really trying to make a difference.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that equity piece is so important for people to just understand that the business opportunities that are forthcoming cannot be gobbled up by the usual suspects in this case, or else there will be a failure to properly execute this plan. My last question. So I actually don't know offhand who in the House is opposed to this. I'm trying to think of a name. I'm going through Republicans. I'm thinking, I don't know if Mike Chippendale is, you know what I mean? He may be open to experimental medicine. I believe Leader Filippi is pro cannabis use. I'm not sure about this, but let's say that Representative X is Democrat, Republican, whatever. They're vehemently opposed to recreational cannabis on what they would describe as moral grounds. You happen to walk into the State House, and that we're back in the State House. This is imaginary. So that fancy new elevator they just put in opens up, and you are in that elevator for 25 seconds with Representative X, who's morally opposed to cannabis. What do you say to them?
I would say that I'm a user of cannabis. Do you think that I am lacking any type of, morals or judgment about how I take care of myself and as an adult, and you can go on to, some different issues that way and just really talk about my privilege as a white middle-class woman, that I've always been able to consume cannabis whenever I wanted to and have never really faced any real danger from prosecution, right? And I would just use myself as an example of how the stigma that has been carried on is incorrect. And that when they do make very vague or wide-ranging remarks about it, that they are including a huge population of Rhode Island and a huge amount of voters in Rhode Island, right? Because that's the thing we haven't talked about, is that Rhode Island has a very large community of people that consume cannabis. It has been recorded. So they risk alienating the larger population. And like you said, of all political, degrees, right? And I have to correct you and I don't mean to put him on blast, but I really hate this argument. But, Leader Filippi did say that he does not want to legislate an industry that is based on vice.
Interesting. Okay. So I stand corrected then. So there he is, Leader Filippi in the, in the elevator. That's fascinating. Yeah. You've got to wonder why then we have the lottery, which does not, which is extremely debilitating. The money was supposed to go to the Department of Education. It does not. You've got to wonder why we have any liquor stores open with that sort of mentality. It's just, it's time. Our pharmacies, that it's time to just move past this issue. It's interesting. Steve Alquist and I were talking about this, a few other reporters, and we kind of all agreed. We're like, a lot of us are, it's a tough subject to cover because it just seems like so obvious that this should just happen. It doesn't seem like there's not a lot of the back and forth. Doesn't have a ton of credibility. It's hard for me to wrap my head around why anybody would vehemently be opposed to this. I would think yes, it is very hard. That is a message that we're trying to convey, because people are thinking, oh, of course, this is great, it's going to happen, whatever. But there are a lot of details. But I would have to say that the biggest piece of it is the law enforcement piece and how involved they are in the legislation. So that's fascinating. That's something to look at for sure. I wonder what the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association has to say about this, and I'll certainly reach out and see if I can figure out what their position is. The
state police, when Governor Raimondo put in her own bill in one of the budgets, they did testify they were in favor of it. mostly because they just wanted to have access to resources to really try to, they said it would be impossible to try to control the traffic from all the different states. They wanted the resources, et cetera, et cetera. So I would assume they would still have that feeling. I mean, again, I'm not trying to put anyone on blast, but if you look at the Senate bill, the first two lines of the bill are talking about law enforcement. So it's when you center that into the bill, when you center law enforcement, when really the whole point of this, right? And I just have to make this, is that our war on drugs has imploded our prison population. Mm-hmm. It has wasted our money in so many different ways. So, to Republicans or people that are fiscally conservative, I would say, what do you want to burn more money? Because this just isn't working for a multitude of reasons, right? So the whole point of this is to stop this incessant cycle of just BS that doesn't work. Criminalizing addiction doesn't work. Criminalizing poverty doesn't work. So why can't we move on? Again, why can't we move on? And there are a lot of unsaid things underneath the surface that are the reasons why.
Yeah, when you throw good money after bad money, it just creates more bad money. There's no other way to put it. So,
well, yeah, we're still going to be living in the same state of just, staying static and not really, sorry, but expanding our consciousness and just sort of moving past all of this. Yeah. So I got to get my hippie stuff in.
I was going to say, we've got to throw it in there, and let's knock it off too with, this notion of, going back to my imaginary college bro in his Corona mm-hmm. Light straw hat, how damaging the association of Bob Marley and that poster that every four college students have on the wall, and this nonsensical view of who uses cannabis products, mm-hmm. what the result of using cannabis would be. This stereotyping and racist sort of viewpoint. We don't need a law for that. Let's just knock that off. That has been so damaging to people of Jamaican, Haitian, and other mm-hmm. Trinidad, other island cultures, mm-hmm. Where that's something that can be done outside of government. And that's just something for people mm-hmm. to wake up and say, hey, you know what, let's move past this stereotyping. And I see well-meaning people too. Somebody that I think you and I both know posted sort of a comment about this and put a reggae song on and not a Bob Marley song, as a YouTube video. And it's like, let's move past that. Let's move past all those mm-hmm. associations. It's just stupid. And mm-hmm. Rhode Island can be a leader here, not just in terms of law, but in terms of culture. And it's a maturity question. Are people ready for that?
Right. Absolutely. And, we do kind of have to learn about cultural appropriation. And sometimes I laugh at my younger self because, or even people who sort of do that now, because I'm like, if you really read about the Rastafarian religion, like neither one of us would ever fit into that category. So, so we got to think about that before we really go forward. Absolutely. And embarrass ourselves. Right. Exactly.
Maggie Kain, ladies and gentlemen, and check out those pages on Instagram and do that research for yourself. This is going to be moving forward here in this fiscal year in Rhode Island. And let's hope a year from now, we're in a much better place overall with this conversation.
Absolutely, Bill. I look forward to coming back next year and talking about how we can, make these laws even better and that we've really accomplished what we've set out to do. Though, yes, we cannabis Rhode Island. So I appreciate you having me on the show.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.